Hello, everyone. It's Stephen Barr and Raul Subramaniam. We are on episode 31 of AWS Made Easy Ask Us Anything live stream, back at our home cities after an incredible but busy, exhausting, inspiring week at reInvent.
It's funny that it's both inspiring and incredibly exhausting, and you kind of realize all that exhaustion literally as you're getting to the airport, getting into the aircraft, and you kind of sit down for 2 minutes and you're just passed out, for the rest of the flight. So it's amazing that both of those things can happen at the same time, but it was so much fun.
It's certainly the departure terminal at Las Vegas airport looked like it looked like the end of a music festival, right? It's just people asleep on their suitcases and completely full flights.
Absolutely. No, it was really incredible. It was really awesome to see, nearly 50,000 people at the venue. Incredible set of meetings, incredible interactions with folks, and it felt incredibly abuzz with all the announcements, all the very interesting, booths in the show floor, different, all the kinds of messaging that you was trying to see, and I think you could really get a sense for what's on top of mind for everyone through all these conversations. So, yeah, I think we're going to go through some of that today.
Absolutely.
And,
Now that we've had a little bit of time to digest it, it's
correct.
like you said, looking back through all the things that happened during the week as people discuss and start sharing on social media. Wow, how was that meeting? How was that? I was. It's a lot for a couple of days.
Correct.
Well, let's talk about some of those principles, and I think we began the discussion at the end of our last day at reInvent, but I think these insights were still pretty fresh at that point. And now that we've had a few days to unpack and let the information distill, it's one of the principles that we wanted to talk about. Okay, well, should we start with a quote from Werner Vogel's keynote?
Yep, let's do that.
All right, so this is the evolve or die.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that became very apparent from all the keynotes and all the conversations on the show floor was the fact that everybody is right now concerned about the economic uncertainty that's on our heads, right?
Yeah.
Everyone wants to make sure that they aren't overcommitting. Everyone wants to make sure that they aren't, investing beyond what they really need to. They're unsure of whether they even should invest at this point. A lot of them are questioning their investments. They're questioning their spend, and some of them are thinking of cutting back on spend. So I think this was a little cryptic in general, but I think if I were to dissect Adam's keynote and Swami's keynote, the one or the two big takeaways from that are that cost cutting or I wouldn't say cost optimization and efficiency are top of mind for everyone. But at the same time, if there is a place to run efficiently, it is really on the cloud or in the cloud.
Well, I guess that's looking at the tension. Well, not tension, but the complementarity of Adam's talk and Werner's talk, right? Where he puts it in this very almost biological interpretation, right? Evolve or die. And you think, okay, these evolution's a good thing, right? Even though it's often brought on by some sort of stressor or trauma to kind of force the process. In the end of the day, it delivers a more efficient outcome.
Yeah.
And so
I think Werner was pretty spot on when he literally nailed it and said, you have to evolve through this. And that in tech terms basically means that you have to invest in innovation to get through, whatever uncertainty there is. If you remain in status quo and don't evolve or don't innovate, then you're probably not going to survive this uncertainty. So I think investments are prudent in the area of innovation, and the cloud is the best place to do it.
Well, that brings us to our second point, which Adam really did a great job of elucidating. The cloud is the place where all this happens.
Correct. I wish I'd spent a little more time to do it, but I think Werner kind of covered it when he talked about the cloud being a different paradigm. But yes, the cloud is the place where you actually want to see all of these innovations and these insights happening. And that is where it's most efficiently done. That I can't even imagine someone kicking off innovation projects in this day and age in their on-premise data centers or trying to build something from scratch themselves. It just wouldn't work.
It just seems like a heavy and slow way of doing things. And I guess it gives you appreciation for what was done before the cloud, but just thinking about the turnaround times and the cycles and procurement processes.
I'm so glad the cloud is here now. So
yeah, absolutely. I think there's nostalgia for what was possible, but not for the limitations.
Correct. Agreed. Okay. So the next big thing that was discussed, of course, is the fact that data is basically going to be the big driver for innovation. And that made total sense. This was part of Swami's keynote. And I think it's very clear to everyone that there is a long tail in getting all of your existing workloads over to the cloud, but that's not going to be real new innovation. All the new innovation is really going to come from the data that your systems already have. And there's a much shorter, or there's a shortcut to getting to this innovation by taking your data, moving it to the cloud, and doing something interesting with it. So betting on data to do this over the next few months or over the next year or so is, I think, the right way to accelerate innovation. And I think Swami was spot on to kind of point that out.
Absolutely. I wanted to acknowledge a quick comment, and it's a kind of fun, really fun AWS memory. That was Darko Mazarosh. Hey, it was great seeing you at the event. Darko, it was great seeing you too. I want to put something on the screen real quick. The Darko, oops, this is the one. Darko drove, and this was his route. So I thought that was pretty impressive of him. Darko, it was great seeing you, and I'm looking forward to catching up on some of your content. So yeah, great to see you. Glad you're back, and looking forward to catching up locally.
Correct. All right. And we're definitely going to have Darko back on the show, Darko, to talk about your epic road trip with, I saw one of your Twitter pictures where you had loaded up your van with all your, all the old machines, and you were about to head off to Vegas. And of course, catching up with Darko, as he was walking the aisles of all the hotels was awesome. And yeah, if you didn't catch any of his, AWS, build on AWS, right?
Build on Live.
Build on Live. You should be able to go catch them now. But really awesome to catch up with you there, Darko.
I would love to know the number. There was 4 days, and how many weeks or months of content was generated in those 4 days. Right? If you line up all the talks end to end, all the live streams, all of the interviews end to end, it might be more than a month's worth of content.
That would be an interesting stat to compute. And of course, Darko just messaged us and he says, currently making a road trip or reinvent vlog. So looking forward to that, Darko. That should be super, super exciting.
Absolutely. Okay. And then we also talked about, Ro, I think you were just leading into this, data governance. That was a big topic in terms of dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's, making sure that the cloud is ready for your medical data, for your insurance claims, to be used in complex environments with different stakeholders, having different views on the data. We've seen row and column level access controls. And we're going to have a few examples of data governance coming up in the next section.
Yeah, we'll talk about that, but just at a high level, if you're putting all the big bets on data, then you really have to make sure that you have all the governance and efficiency patterns in place so that you can feel comfortable doing or unleashing the value in there. So far, most organizations just have data lying in their systems, doing nothing with it. And if you're not really going to do anything with it and it's still sitting inside the systems, great. I mean, you don't care much about it. But now that you're taking all this data, moving it to the cloud and doing interesting stuff with it, you really want to make sure that you have all those governance practices in place. So I think one of the complaints that I heard a lot of people talk about is like, oh, there are so many tools out there that have been doing this for a while, nothing new or nothing exciting. But I think if you really take a step back and think about it, if data is going to be the big bet, you need all those governance tooling in place so that you can feel comfortable with the innovation that comes with it. So AWS has spent the last 5 years building some amazing tech around machine learning and AI and BI and analytics. Now's the time to leverage it all. And they spent a ton of time putting together all of this governance and efficiency in place. So while nothing shiny came out of those announcements, I think the fundamental foundations of governance and efficiency are all in place now. So we can all feel very confident about putting data there and doing something with it.
Well, I think data governance, it's almost like IAM, right? It's there in the background, and you don't want to think about it because you know it's there.
Correct. Actually, that's an interesting analogy. When I first started, 2007, early 2007, when I started with AWS, there was no IAM, right? And when IAM came about, it was like, okay, it's just a incremental change. Only later did we realize that it was so fundamental to everything that was to come after that. And I think IAM came in 2011 or 2010 or 2011, I think.
Well, before that, it was just your keys.
It was just not. In fact, they didn't even have keys initially. It was a username and password to start with, and then came keys. So you would have to share that with pretty much everybody. But I mean, that's the amazing thing about some of these very foundational and core services. So just like IAM kind of fundamentally changed everything, I think a lot of the practices that have been put around data now are going to be a pretty big deal.
Well, and speaking about foundational and core services, I think we can move on to event-driven, talk about that.
Correct. And I think that is something that Werner Vogels literally, nailed brilliantly in his keynote to explain that the cloud is fundamentally a different paradigm. And if you are going to unlock innovation, it comes from being able to react in short order to events that have been generated out of systems. And also, if you want something to be truly scalable, reliable, and efficient, it's got to be built as an event-driven architecture. So a lot of very, very neat insights. It's fascinating to see how a service like S3 has evolved, and to look at the S3's design principles that they created 20 years ago, and compare them with how it stood the test of time in all these years. It's been fascinating learning.
Well, that was one of the great points he made in his keynote. Is that S3 started as 8 microservices, and it's now at 235. And they've never had to do everyone pause while we copy and paste S3 to S3.1, whatever it would be. They haven't ever had to do that. They've been able to add on additional functionality over time by having this event-driven architecture, and that's allowed them to swap out back-end technologies many times, add things like intelligent tiering, and being able to do that. And so, and I loved we'll get into it in a bit. I really like the examples he gave of how reality is event-driven, and so making that. I'm a big fan of making the physical model and the whiteboard model and the code model as close together as possible.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed.
All right. Well, should we jump into some of our discussions? We wanted to talk about, let's talk about some of the articles that revolve around governance.
Yeah. By the way, there was literally a flurry of announcements that was coming through that entire week. We struggled to keep up with everything and get into the details, but we have a bunch of stuff to go over today, and we've had a little time to kind of dive into them. So let's get to them.
Absolutely. Here it comes. All right.
Okay, so I think we have 3 or 4 announcements that especially highlight how some of these are directly related to governance. So, Security Hub now integrates with AWS Control Tower. This was announced yesterday. This is pretty neat. We right now, if you really look at a lot of the security and you know the gaps in some of these governance things, they're kind of all over the place. You've got Security Hub that does its own thing. It wasn't really connected to Control Tower, and then you've got your policies that you can set, kind of separately. So it's kind of all over the place. But I feel like under Control Tower, all of these little pieces are now coming together. So it'd be great to have one place to control and manage it all. And with these integrations, it just makes life a lot simpler. For those of you who are not familiar with Security Hub, it's basically it's got a whole lot of best practices and analyzers, or what we call finders, that are in place to go look at security issues. And looks like there's about 160 of them right now.
These
you should have them turned on irrespective. They're all things that you would consider in your well-architected framework. And so you should turn them on. It'll tell you what you're missing in the way you've set up your AWS accounts. And yeah, definitely a good to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think the name of the game here is integrations. That's where that's really exciting to see all these, because AWS, they're known for just developing things in a distributed way, but as a way of then later adding in these integrations. That's really, really welcome change.
Yeah. So I'm going to give this one 4.5 stars.
All right, let's do that. 4.5.
4.5 clouds.
4.5 clouds.
Stars. Correct. And definitely simplifies.
Awesome.
We started with a complex state, and now things are getting easier.
Because all of this, whenever they announce this integration, someone is like, finally, I don't have to maintain this horrible piece of glue code anymore. So
exactly.
A few people have breathed a sigh of relief for this.
Without
all right. Awesome.
Okay, on to the next one.
Yeah, let's do it. All right, here is. Oh, excuse me. Let's cue up the article transition. Here is the next one. This is another great example of governance. This is SageMaker Studio now supports fine-grained data access control with AWS Lake Formation and Amazon EMR. So the idea is fully integrated ID. So that's SageMaker. And then so now you can have, okay, here we go. All jobs that ran in the cluster use the same IAM role. Therefore, to run jobs that needed access to different data sources, you have to configure the EC2 instance profile, which allowed policies that allowed access to the union of all such data sources. So I was thinking about that when I was in healthcare. You want to do research, but not everyone was allowed to have access to the financial data. That was a much more restricted subset. And so if you were doing something on like drug efficacy or something like that, you wouldn't want finance to necessarily be in there, but you wouldn't want to build out two separate clusters either. And so this...
Exactly. So here, again, the efficiency and governance kind of goes hand in hand. You want to build a data lake with lake formation where you dump all of your data in one place. And then you now can give very fine-grained control to users to look at very specific aspects of the data without really having to replicate or create multiple copies of the stuff. So I think that's really neat, because data engineers spend an insane amount of time cleaning the data and making sure it's all right. And then as you keep creating copies of it, you either have to clean them all up independently, or you end up serializing everything where until one team finishes, you can't go on and start work on the next team, because it's like a pipeline. So this having one single data lake with all the data in there, but fine-grained control for people to access only the stuff that they are authorized to access, is awesome.
Yeah, and just kind of again thinking back to the different examples. Say if you have two hospitals that are merging, and you have some patients that have agreed to be part of part of a study, but some haven't from the other hospital. Well, then you want that row level access control, or column or the table level, right? Where if you want to join in, like I said earlier, finance or other those kind of things. It's really exciting now to be able to have just one cluster that can do this without worrying about. And I hate to say it, but probably a lot of this before was done on the honor system of just don't look at it, don't touch that, don't do that.
Yeah.
Which ideally should be all that you need, but people are human, mistakes happen, and that's why we have governance, is to restrict that blast radius.
Completely agree. So this one definitely gets a 4.5 clouds from me, and 100% simplifies.
This is really cool. Nice work, SageMaker team. Well, again, integrations, right? Working. It's not just SageMaker. There's a SageMaker, Lake Formation, EMR to honor those policies. So, all right, that's an exciting one. Let's queue up the next one, which is Code Catalyst. Let me queue up our transition, and let's do it. This one is pretty exciting. Amazon Code Catalyst. This was also under. So this is Unified Software Development Service.
So think of all the peripherals, best practices that go into actually deploying your code from the time you've written your code. It's you need to do builds, you need to run tests, you need to, check in all the code in the branches, run all your, QA exercises, and then do some form of blue-green deployments, test out your stuff. The beauty of all of this is that all of that is managed by Code Catalyst, and it gives you best of breed, best of class, best practices. Use a lot of bests in that sentence. But it basically lets you get all of those benefits right out of the box, start leveraging them without having to create your own. I still know of hundreds of teams that still use Jenkins or, the flavors of Jenkins to try and do CI/CD, and it just feels like the wrong paradigm for the wrong problem. So leveraging something like Code Catalyst, where you get all of these best practices out of the box, you do still get to kind of bring in all of your tools that you're comfortable with to kind of plug into this pipeline. But the more heavy lifting that AWS does for you in these areas, the easier it becomes for you. None of these things are actually value add, but they're just very foundational and absolute requirements for building software. So the more you can leverage AWS to do all that heavy lifting for you, just go do it.
Yeah.
And Code Catalyst is pretty neat.
It's funny, like it's not value add in a direct sense, but this is the stuff that this is the death by 1,000 paper cuts when you don't have this right.
Correct. So this is necessary, but not even remotely sufficient to deliver value. This is absolutely necessary from a standpoint that it is foundational. It's fundamental to delivering software.
Well, this could be a big understatement. Software teams spend significant time, resources are collaborating effectively. Yes, many billions of dollars have been made fixing that, and many billions more because it's a hard problem.
Correct. Interesting stat from dev spaces, by the way. Developers don't spend more than an hour a day in their IDEs, and the rest of the time is literally spent on all the other stuff around their applications, their code, their life cycles around it. So yeah, it's crazy.
The dev spaces, again, that's our cloud-based IDE. For those of you new to the show, it runs on Gravitons. It is a fantastic development environment that, again, same principle in terms of removing the complexity, making it really easy to just jump in right to the core and start coding. Philosophy is have all the stuff around that, all the different layers, automated, cataloged, versioned, so that we just focus on what's important.
Exactly. So this one, we have to dive in a little bit more, so I'll probably give it a 4. All right. It's in preview. We're still trying to get access to Catalyst, and we'll get you more as we learn more about it. And 100% simplifies. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
Oh, yeah, the more automation you can set up to not have to worry about these things, the better. And just one other funny aside, thinking about one of my favorite sci-fi authors, Werner Vinge, he would talk about in the future there's going to be a trade called the computational archaeologist, because having to dig ourselves out from this giant stacks that we make, and so being able to bring some order to chaos is a good thing. And so I see this as
100%.
a piece of that. All right, let's go over our last governance article and let's talk about RDS blue green. All right,
Okay.
announcing Amazon RDS blue green deployments. Well, what is this one? When would you use this?
Okay, so this one is actually pretty interesting, and it mostly has to do with scenarios where you're, let's say, upgrading your schemas. And when you're updating your schemas, you start with state 1 and you end up in state 2. And there's, God help you if state 2 was actually bad for whatever reason, and your migrations didn't actually go as planned, or you ended up doing migrations which just caused a whole lot of stuff to break without you realizing it. And that happens, right? And that is what you were stuck with in the past. Now, RDS Blue Green basically allows you to deploy 2 versions, the blue and the green, of RDS. From what we've heard, conservatively, it's a 30-second downtime for the transition to actually happen. But realistically, whatever time it takes for applications to switch over from blue to green is going to be the downtime. So getting real data on how long the transition takes would be really interesting. 30 seconds is what is considered conservative. So that's definitely interesting. It's not bad at all when you're doing a blue-green like setup.
Well, that's what you're talking about here. These what they call switch over guardrails that will time out promotion of the staging environment.
Correct.
That's I've seen some pretty gnarly data projects where a migration was half attempted and then given up on, and then all of a sudden every single entity has a birthday, and it's, oh my goodness. And, I'm not joking with that one. And because it's really hard. It's not an easy problem, and to be able to reverse your changes, to test this out, make sure nothing's broken, that's pretty exciting.
Correct. So this one definitely gets actually I'd give this a 3.5 clouds, because I didn't see very many example screenshots, stuff like that in this.
Well, okay. Well, here's the full article. Right.
Actually, the full article has everything.
I think we might have to hand it another half a cloud.
Yeah, let's go ahead and add that. I think we can give that to them. When I was first looking at it, again, apologies, I'm severely jet lagged since returning back with a 13.5-hour time difference.
I don't know how you did it. My 2-hour flight was like, okay, I'm at the end of my tether here, so I don't know how you did it. Like two hours put you what, 20% of the way there?
Oh yeah, no, less than that. So the total door-to-door travel time for me was about 32 hours.
That's a lot.
It was fun.
No, I remember one time I looked at my watch. I thought, Raul's still in the air. So nice work.
Okay. So this one is very, very cool. Again, just summarizing, this is all around data governance and efficiency, where AWS has just spent a lot of time making sure that all the building blocks you need to make sure that you're doing stuff securely and in the correct way, and sharing best practices around how you should do some things. All that tooling is provided to you out of the box. So leverage it so that you can feel more confident about what's happening to your data, what's happening to your systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay, so we've given this 4. This is a simplifies. Let's take a 30-second break, and we come back. Let's switch gears over to the Data Drives Innovation set, and we'll review a set of articles. I think it was a great segment on data governance. All right, we'll take this 30-second break, and we'll be right back.
Public cloud costs going up and your AWS bill growing without the right cost controls? CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by focusing on AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe with zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. The best part? With your approval, CloudFix finds and implements AWS fixes to help you run more efficiently. Visit cloudfix.com for a free savings assessment.
All right, we're back. Now here's a fun article that is an example of the data-driven innovation on a topic we really like, comprehend.
Great. So before we kind of dive into this specific one, let me just lay out or give you the lay of the land when it comes to data-related services. I mean, historically, both Andy Jassy and Swami have had this one slide that talks about the gazillion data-related services that exist in the AWS world. And there are tons of them. So there are a bunch of them that are geared towards you building new models of your own based on the data that you have. And then there's a second category, which I call, or which I think internally has been called vertical AI for the longest time, which are these higher order services where AWS has done all the hard work to create all of the fundamental models for you right outside the box. Right out of the box, and you can leverage them. Simple examples of that are AWS Forecast, AWS Personalize, or AWS Comprehend, AWS Transcribe. You've got Lex, you've got Poly. There are so many vertical AI or higher order AI solutions that allow you to take your data and do something really interesting with it. And Comprehend is one that I really like. It's basically NLP analysis. So whether you want entities from a whole bunch of, or a whole blob of text, or you want sentiment, or you want to understand sentiment around an entity, all of those things are enabled by this service called Comprehend. So the announcement that we have, Stephen, if you can bring back the announcement.
Yep. I was trying to find that slide that you were talking about. There we go. Comprehend.
Great. So Comprehend has now announced support for classification and entity extraction directly from a variety of different formats. In the past, it was basically just text and PDFs to a certain extent. Like you typically use extract stuff out of there, and then use Comprehend on whatever text you extracted from there. But it now looks like PDFs, Word documents, and images in their native formats are all going to be supported, which is pretty awesome. And you should, if you have documents, I think a very simple example of how you can leverage your organizational data. You've got emails, you've got data in your CRM solution about your customers' interactions with your teams. You've got data in tools like Zendesk and Jira and all of these systems where people actually have put in a lot of tribal knowledge about the product, and it all resides in these conversations between customer and support, or in conversations internally within the team. You got your Zoom calls, you got Chime calls, you got whatever tool you use. PowerPoint slides. You got so much enterprise knowledge. If you could take it all, let Comprehend run through it, you can actually get a lot more efficient into digging into old data, like being able to search for stuff. You can also become more effective in actually running and managing a global team that might be remote, because then you can look at engagement between people in these documents and so on. There are some very, very interesting ideas and insights that you can gather from all of this. So again, this is probably one of those pieces of data that every organization has tons of, but is just lying in their silos without any insights being garnered from them.
Well, you used to think of PDFs as being like this data black hole, where the data would go in there and you could never get it back out. It lost its structure, and sometimes a PDF is just a picture of a page, right?
Correct.
And you never actually, you think,
Correct.
why are they doing this? You're losing all the structure, but now you can get it back out, and that's really exciting. Because, like I said, there's piles of PDFs floating around there. and they have a lot of value. And now to make them searchable and to bring them into the data lake, to bring them into the knowledge warehouse that's
Correct.
accessible to the whole enterprise, that's where this fits in.
Absolutely. So I love, by the way, I'm a huge fan of all of these higher order AI services, because to build a model like this, you would need so much data that no individual company actually has that much data to actually create a really good comprehension model. And AWS has the data and has built the model for us. All we have to do is leverage it on our data set and start using the insights to do something interesting.
And it's really neat. It's not just it's not just the recognition of the text, but they also have added other features around entity recognition, and so you can and document classification of the document itself. So if you just throw in a pile of PDFs, you can say these are invoices, these are contracts, these are other types of records that you could then automatically sort, right? Because if you might not have them sorted in any other way.
Yeah, I would say that's a combination of extract as well as comprehend, and they work seamlessly hand in hand.
Yeah, it's pretty. Okay, here is the actual process PDFs, Word documents, and images with comprehend for IDP. So that's the full name of this. Intelligent IDP, intelligent data processing.
This is really, really cool. So you've got PDFs, docx's, PNGs, JPEGs, or TIFFs. Of course, plain text has always been there. So all of those are now supported.
Here's the feature, the custom classifier API. So say if you had insurance claims, that's the example they give.
Correct.
Sort them into home, car, or personal insurance claims. All right. Well, given this is really an announcement and a blog post and documentation, they all are announced
I definitely
together.
give it a 4.5 clouds.
Yeah.
I think this is definitely deserving of a 4.5.
Absolutely agree. And then in terms of tagging,
100% simplifies. The fact that it unlocks value out of all these documents that are sitting in your organization is pretty remarkable. Oh, by the way, one simple thing that might help a lot of you, if you use something like AWS Kendra to basically just take all these documents and the data in there and index it all, that could save you a ton of time searching through them and getting to the right meeting or the right, blog post or the right Slack chat or the right, Google chat, whatever tool you use to get to the right conversation and the right data. Yeah, it's incredibly valuable.
And this might even I'll have to look at the pricing, but I wonder if this basically saves you a call to textract, because it's one single API call.
It probably is. It's probably integrated a bunch of stuff that was already in textract and brought it over here. Like you said, would definitely be worth looking at the API. But since it supports things like PDFs and PNGs out of the box, it does seem like a scenario where you wouldn't have to call textract at all.
All right. Well, this is pretty exciting. Let's move on to our next one, which is we're going to talk about data exchange.
Did we already do the clouds and the simplifies?
We did, so right? This was a simplifies and we said 4.5.
4.5. Yeah.
4.5. There we go. 4.5 and simplifies. Awesome. Let's move on to the next one. Here it comes. Okay, here is AWS Data Exchange for Amazon S3 in preview.
So here is the interesting thing. Data Exchange is one of those services where we haven't heard an announcement in months, if not years. And I actually thought that the service had kind of disappeared into the black hole of other AWS services. So, but it is exciting that they've come up with something new. The biggest challenge that most organizations have is that they don't have enough data to create any model of value, right? If you were trying to get, information about trades that happened in the stock market from 1930 to now, to kind of gather some trends so that you can act accordingly. You just couldn't get that data because, I mean, individuals don't have or collect that kind of data all the time. So data exchange, I thought, was really neat way for publishers who have data to publish their data and share it with a broader community for a subscription, price. It's the way that most news agencies subscribe to a Thomson Reuters or an INA.
When I used to do finance research, we had the Wharton Research Data Services, which would give us the ticker tape data, and we used to actually order it as a box of tapes. With the older professors. So this is a lot easier.
Way easier. So I love this announcement. Glad to see data exchange somewhat resurrected with some new integrations and announcements. And go check it out. It's an easy way to subscribe to a whole lot of very interesting data from very reputed publishers. So leverage it to create new insights.
So like if you were a data scientist and you had a bunch of, I don't know, zip codes and you wanted to join that to like census data to get extra richness to your model, that would be one place to get it. And it's already there. It's already reviewed. It's already cleaned.
And now it dumps it all up in S3, so you can take a look at, you can basically start running queries right away.
All right, ratings?
I'd give this a 4. It's still in preview. We still have to explore it. And 100% simplifies. I thought this was a dead service because no one was using it. But it looks like some folks are, and they've just made it easier to derive value.
All right, well, let's jump into a similar one with a fairly similar announcement. Data Lake.
Yep. Correct. So this one takes it one step further, and it's actually very simple, very similar to the S3 announcement we just did. Now we have integration with lake formation. So if you've created a data lake with the lake formation, then you can pick the data sources in AWS Data Exchange and have them automatically show up as part of your data lake.
And what I thought was neat, they gave a link and you can see the kind of data they have. Let's see, like genome aggregation database, common crawl. They've got this gene sequence data, legal entity identifier, YouTube data set. It's really neat, this idea of curated data available that you don't have to write some ETL job and parse some CSV file, and which has been done 100 times on the exact same data set. No, it's right there in S3.
Without a doubt, 100%. So I'm going to give this also a 4.5.
All right.
And 100% simplifies.
Perfect. All right, well, let's switch gears then. I think this one's, I think all the comments from the previous one apply. So let's talk about the cloud being event-driven. We'll take a 30-second break and then switch gears over to event-driven cloud.
Sounds good.
All right.
Is your AWS bill going up? CloudFix makes AWS cost savings easy and helps you with your cloud hygiene. Think of CloudFix as the Norton Utilities for AWS. AWS recommends hundreds of new fixes each year to help you run more efficiently and save money. But it's difficult to track all these recommendations and tedious to implement them. Stay on top of AWS recommended savings opportunities and continuously save 25% off your AWS bill. Visit cloudfix.com for a free savings assessment.
All right. Well, I guess before we jump into the specific couple of articles, let's just talk about data-driven, or the world is event-driven. I think this is another reference to Werner Vogel's keynote.
100% true. So building apps in the cloud really means that you need to leverage the event-driven architecture so that you can have scale without, major downtimes. You can scale elastically, and that's where all the efficiency comes from. I think historically, Kubernetes has been the big bet that everyone has made, but Kubernetes is not the be all and end all of cloud native. Cloud native means truly building a service that is event driven. There are the whole orchestration of all of these different processes are basically around the events that all these different systems are going to keep generating. So I think Werner Vogel's kind of just doubled down on that and said, stop thinking the way you think about your monolithic applications on premise. And if you're building for the cloud, you have to think about an event-driven mechanism of, dealing with all of your data and so on. And by the way, we should, if we can, pull up the S3 principles, which is truly a masterclass. If you haven't watched Werner Vogel's keynote, please do. I think the way he talks about all the basic principles that they had used to design S3.
You mean the distributed computing manifesto?
I think computing manifesto had some of it, but they had 9 designs. There's a GitHub repository that talks about the design principles for AWS S3. And it's literally a 1-page markup file.
Let's see. I see this diving deep on S3 consistency.
No, there's not even consistency. Just search for GitHub S3 design principles. That might be the first one. Yep, that is the one. Okay, so this is really, really neat. The way, and you should watch Werner Vogel's keynote where it describes each one of these concepts and how they apply to S3. The asynchrony part of it is absolutely fascinating. It kind of, it brings you a completely new perspective about how to think things if you haven't already been, or if you haven't been doing event driven, or if you've fundamentally spent most of your time in monolithic architectures. So take the time to go through it. Whatever you're designing, run it through this amazing set of filters or amazing set of design constraints and see whether you are meeting all of these requirements or not. Now, there are times when you will consciously make a trade-off and say, okay, I'm not at a scale where some of these things will matter, and that's totally fine. But at any point of time, if you're evaluating your architecture, go through this document, use this as a mechanism of trying to figure out whether you've architected your solution well or not.
And what I really like is that this is not a brand new thing, but what's new is that the tools are now ready to support this at planet scale. Whereas before it might have been it might have existed within the confines of a really neat Erlang application or something like that, where it existed, but it wasn't something you could easily build yourself.
Correct. Exactly.
And you had to know a lot about things like locking and mutexes, and it was really hard, which is why the serial design pattern persists for so long, and most of us still tend to think it's serial
for everything. Anyway, so this is pretty neat. Please go through it if you get a chance and evaluate all of your architecture decisions using this as your framework. I think it'll stand you in good stead no matter what. So with that, shall we dive into a couple of the very specific announcements that were event-driven centered?
Sure, let's queue up App Composer.
Great.
All right, this is introducing AWS Application Composer. This is already getting, it simplifies. So this is a visual interface to connect AWS services together on a visual canvas.
Yeah. So I've been playing around with this for the last 48 hours or so, and I will be honest that I actually got a little confused. Okay. So one, to be very clear, this is not an application composer. It's more like a SAM template composer, where you can visually generate all of your SAM templates. And it is supposedly or it supposedly creates all the IAM permissions between all the components that you set up. There's a couple of very interesting YouTube videos that'll kind of get you started if you search for application composer tutorial. I have a few fundamental problems with the way the solution has been designed. Number one is I keep getting confused whether when you compose a set of services chained together, whether it implies that you are raising that, a predecessor of a particular node is generating events and you're consuming those. Actually, why don't I bring up application composer and why don't we walk through an example to bring that up? Give me 1 second.
And effectively, it's a GUI for making CloudFormation/SAM templates.
Exactly. I'm just bringing this one up. Give me 1 second.
No problem. While you're doing that, I'll scan through some of the other. This is the more detailed post on Application Composer. This is what it looks like, and you see as you work on it, it will generate for you a CloudFormation template. This is our nice familiar CloudFormation, or in this case SAM, because we're in the serverless type.
Correct. Okay. So am I streaming? Yes, I am.
Yep, that's on.
Great. Okay. So what you can do over here is you can basically create a project. Right now I'm on the Brave browser. So unless you're on Chrome, you really can't write back to your local files, but that's fine. The concepts are still the same and you can export it at a later stage. So I'll just start with unconnected. Now, let's say I have a scenario where I have an S3 bucket. And what I want to do is I want to take all the events that come out of this, put it into an SQS queue so that I have some scale and I connect this together. Okay. And then I have a Lambda function that takes this event, okay, and does something with it. Okay. So let's say I was dumping in images over here. Maybe it pulls out the date when the image was taken from it and cleans it up and puts it in a different folder or in a different bucket in S3. Let's say that's my pipeline. When I lay it out like this, one part of my head says, the events that are going to come out of the S3 put and the S3 update, those events are basically what are going into the queue. But how and what do I need to specify in the connections over here so that the Lambda function is able to read and write to S3? So I can take the output of this and put it into S3. I just don't know whether this composer assumes that I am writing back to S3, or does it kind of recognize that I'm reading from S3? And visually, like, these connections are just weird. So I get completely confused about how the permission schemes can be granted, because I'm in my head, I don't understand whether this is all about the events coming in or is this about different kinds of dependencies. So all very confusing. I'm still playing around with it, still exploring it. But right now, I wouldn't give it a simplifies. I think it's an attempted simplifies, but it's just getting a little confusing because the visual paradigm isn't that straightforward for this.
So maybe as they iterated, maybe it's in like how Amplify started, where I think Amplify for a while was really hard to use.
Correct.
But so we will keep an eye on that for now. So maybe should we reserve judgment on the cloud on the?
Yes, let's reserve judgment on it, because right now it's just complex and I don't understand it well enough to be able to leverage it. Maybe it's my tiredness and haven't fully recovered from my travels that I'm not getting it. But it's just, you have a node has an input and a node has an output. The output, you would assume are all events, but
it certainly doesn't
supposed to solve the IAM problem.
It certainly doesn't seem like the kind of tool where you could say, okay, you could use this and not know CloudFormation. I don't think
you definitely need to know SAM at the very least.
Yeah.
Like you need to master SAM to be able to look at the template to understand exactly what it does. And while it does grant a bunch of IAM permissions, there doesn't seem to be a pattern to it.
All right. Well, we've reserved judgment on that one. Let's revisit that in a couple of months. All right. Let's jump into Event Bridge pipes. All right, Event Bridge. Oh, reshare my screen.
Okay.
There we are. Event Bridge pipes now generally available.
This announcement actually brought a ton of smiles on my face when it first came out. For those of us who are command line aficionados, where we literally type out massive piped commands. I don't know. Every time I say sorry, I think this thing thinks I'm calling Sue. Okay. I have to figure out how to shut this up while we live stream. Okay. So where was I?
Event Bridge pipes.
So pipes. We just love, or I love in particular, running a whole bunch of Linux commands that are piped together. That's kind of, been the de facto way of using the command line for many, many years. And now that you can actually do that with events, and that's the beauty of it. You can take a process, what comes out of it is a bunch of events, then you can transform it with another process. And we are so used to doing that in the command line that to be able to bring that to events in any system and just use event bridge pipes to do that seems incredibly fascinating. I can't wait to get my hands dirty with it. I haven't had the time to spend working with pipes, but I am pretty sure that you can create some really what are today very sophisticated and complicated transformations of data into a simple, pipe, which would actually fundamentally be very easy to understand as well. So the readability of pipes is actually pretty good because you have very standard structures. So I would love to see how this actually translates into a real world use case.
Well, as part of Event Bridge pipes and also doing a bit of a shout out, I need to do a shout out to Nick STE. He is a PM with Event Bridge pipe. There we go, current PM for Event Bridge. And he took the time to meet with some of our team members during reInvent who had a lot of questions about this. And he did a deep dive. So look up this API 206, which is getting even further into Event Bridge pipes. And then Nick was really, really fond of it. If you see this, thank you. That was really helpful to have a deep dive about Event Bridge pipes with some of our team members who are heavily using Event Bridge.
Correct. So this I would definitely give it a simplifies and 4.5 star.
All right, here comes 4.5 star.
I'm being very generous today.
And simplify. Yeah, well, they did a good job.
Yeah, they did. They absolutely did.
All right.
Okay, moving on to. Do we have another one?
We have one more, which is step function parallelism. Here comes.
Oh, yep.
Yep. All right. Here is the article. AWS Step Functions launches large-scale parallel workflows for data processing and serverless applications.
Yeah. This is a very interesting one that actually Werner Vogels brought up even in his keynote, which is a lot of customers seem to use Lambda as the compute to do the, either the map function, to write up the map function or the reduce function. And you can get all the scale you want because, Lambdas are incredibly scalable. So I think that's the interesting use case that they found out of talking to their customers. And now
this is what they said, one of their unanticipated use cases that they only found.
Is one of the exactly. This is one of the unanticipated use cases. And you can now have step functions basically create these supermassive parallel workflows that are called on the data sets that you have to run the map and the produce operations.
Yeah, it looks like a really powerful paradigm. I think, again, we watched that keynote. There's a great bit of theatrics where Werner ordered French fries and illustrates having someone cook these French fries one at a time. And so I guess French fries is a time where you want massive parallelism. Don't do them one at a time in serial. This is a great idea. I've certainly used SQS and lambdas for this purpose.
Yeah.
But then
the interesting thing, though, is
class function.
The interesting thing was that step functions already apparently had a map function, which I hadn't used, but somebody brought it to my attention. And I'm curious to learn a little bit more about how this is different from the previously implemented map function in step functions.
Yeah, that is a really good question. I guess they said that it does a bit of downstream monitoring to make sure that what's happening can be received by what's next, I suppose. I want to make sure I read that right. Because here we go. The maximum concurrency feature of the map to ensure that you do not exceed the concurrency of a downstream service. So I guess it's not monitoring, but more just that's its rate limit of up to 10,000.
Correct.
Because if you just unleashed it on all of Lambda, that would that's a lot.
Yes, that is a lot. Okay. So this one definitely simplifies. And I would give this a 4-star.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our time for today. Thank you for watching. And I think we're going to be having more of this Talks from reInvent series as we discuss some of the other principles in more depth, just like today, talking about the evolve or die, talking about more about event-driven. Yeah. I think this was a really, really fun discussion. Raul, do you have any other kind of closing thoughts to bring us out?
No, I think, like I said, reInvent has given us enough content to last us an entire year. So there's going to be tons coming out of it as we digest it, as we see all the new announcements coming in, and as we see some of the other AWS customers do interesting things with these new services. So we will keep you posted. Please subscribe to our channel. And we will be back on air soon.
Yep, next Tuesday, we will be airing an interview with the founders of ShotStack, which is the API that we use behind the scenes to make all of our lovely transitions. And they're a great example of stitching together AWS services and building another service that other people then stitch together to build things like video editors and really neat programs. Looking forward to hearing from them. That's going to be a really fun discussion, a lot of shop talk, I'm sure. So tune into that 100%. Next week. All right. Well, thanks again. Have a really nice week, everyone. And we will see you next week.
Perfect. Please subscribe, and thanks again. And please leave us some comments.
Please. We are now on Spotify. So please catch up with that. We are on Spotify. We are wherever you are. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
See you all soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Is your AWS public cloud bill growing? While most solutions focus on visibility, CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by finding and implementing AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe. There's zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. We've helped organizations save millions of dollars across tens of thousands of AWS instances. Interested in seeing how much money you can save? Visit cloudfix.com to schedule a free assessment and see your yearly savings.